Good morning, Wakaliwood. My name is Fulabi, your daily news anchor, ready to bring you the fresh daily news of the day. Meanwhile, we've been hoping you had a great New Year's, as the last decade is now over and it is now time for Wakaliwood 2020, following major renovations after some building complications. As for the first topic of 2020 in the new Wakaliwood studios, we have some recent events in Hong Kong to speak of, with Jim on the details. Jim, I'll let you take the wheel on the topics.
Of course, Fulabi. Today we are discussing some recent nationalistic movements regarding China, with specific focus on Hong Kong. Before we get into this though, Fulabi, what is nationalism and imperialism?
A good question. Well, the official definition from the Oxford Dictionary is that nationalism is identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations. In simpler context, nationalism is the idea of one putting their country first and showing great pride for their country. Regarding the interest of other nations, there is also imperialism. Imperialism, as defined in the Oxford Dictionary, as a policy of extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy or force. In simpler context, this is a policy whereas a country strives to improve their power either through means of diplomacy or through the growth of their military.
Okay, good to know, especially for all of our fellow viewers. Now that we have context on these terms, let's get to the bottom of this ordeal. With me today, we have Alfredo with more information. So Mr. Fredo, please explain to us the current circumstances and events occurring in Hong Kong, China.
Thank you, Jim. Recently in Hong Kong, there have been numerous movements against plans to allow extradition to mainland China. These movements first began in April due to the extradition bill made. It would have allowed for criminal suspects to be extradited to mainland China under certain circumstances. The Hong Kongers in the movement opposed this bill because they felt that it would expose Hong Kongers to unfair trials or treatment and give China more power over Hong Kong. They thought it would be used to target any protesters that China didn't agree with. The actual protests didn't start until June to rival the allowance of extradition of criminals to mainland China. These protests consisted of hundreds of thousands of people walking the streets, and after a few weeks, the leader, Carrie Lam, said the bill would be suspended indefinitely.
So how did these protests gain footing and start to escalate?
Well, that's a great question, Jim. The protest movement originally started with an economic upheaval and a surge of immigration. With these changes, Hong Kong's tradition identity was put under tremendous pressure. The result of this was that the identity of Hong Kongers was shortly felt much stronger, along with being narrower and more combative. And this movement, being Hong Konger and being Chinese, have been complementary, suddenly came to feel more exclusive. Hong Kongers have also been recently using national style identity to use symbols and much more, such as flags and anthems, those in which were of little use beforehand. When pro-Beijing lawmakers pushed out a bill to allow extradition to mainland China, many saw this as an attack on both their rights and their distinct identity at a moment when it was already seemed weakened. The protests are a form of backlash that followed this action, along with widened divisions amongst Hong Kongers.
I see. And as for the aftermath of these sudden changes, how is it currently affecting people other than through protest movements?
These changes have been affecting people quite a bit in large areas regarding the identities of Hong Kongers. The city does tend to appear united, but some surveys do suggest that residents are only growing more distrustful of outsiders, along with becoming more polarized by ethnicity, age, and class. Locals on the scene have described families as being torn apart due to their political differences following these changes, and scuffles have also become more frequent during the protests. On top of these changes, living conditions have also worsened and became more expensive due to China using Hong Kong as their hub for financial services. Along with using them as a conduit for trade purposes, the expenses were driven up for this, and locals in Hong Kong only suffered from it.
Okay, good to know. Well, I think that's all we need to hear from you today. Thank you for coming to the channel.
And thank you too for your time.
And with that, back to you at the studio, Fulabi.
Okay, so the picture has now turned much clearer with that explanation. So, Hong Kongers have been growing more protective of their identities following certain events induced by mainland China, and it has been sending Hong Kong into absolute chaos, with large-scale protests and divisions among citizens. But what are these divisions, or groups, and how did they come to form? We'll be right back after these short messages, with reporters discussing who exactly leads these groups and how they contribute to the new defensive state of Hong Kong. Are you tired of the soothing taste of modern Coca-Cola? Do you miss the 1800s, back when your homie was executed for stealing bread? Well, today is your lucky day, because we have a jacked surprise for you. Now you can have the great tangy flavor of Coca-Cola plus the old school kick. Trust me, you will love it from the first sip, and it will be worth coming back for more. Not only do you have the great flavor package, but you'll never need to sleep again. Now with a little something extra from the Coca plant. Available in select retailers only. Ugandan Cola Inc. is not responsible for death, injury, or addiction following the drinking of this product. Buy at your own risk. And we are back in the Wakaliwood studios, here where we left off. Previously, we have went over the current protests in the Hong Kong area and how they came to be, and it turns out that people have been culturally split into groups due to identity tensions. Although we do know about these groups, how did they start and who started them? On the scene we have historian and politician Mary Naira and reporters Remy's Kitchen and Macaroni discussing who led these groups and who started them. And with that, we'll now continue with information on the groups, starting with Naira.
Thank you, Fulabi. Joshua Wong and Agnes Chow, both 22, and Nathan Law, 26, are three leaders of Desmosito, a pro-democracy youth activist group in Hong Kong that has been on the front lines of protests. Established on April 10, 2016, the political party works for the goal of obtaining an autonomy after 2047. By 2047, the one country, two systems principle is meant to expire, according to the Hong Kong Basic Law.
Interesting. As for China in general, what could be some past examples of imperialism and or nationalism in this country?
That's a great question. A popular example of both imperialism and nationalism would include the events at Tiananmen Square on June 14, 1989. Prior to the event, there had been frequent protests occurring in the Tiananmen Square starting on April 15th in order to achieve a balanced democracy and in a fight for freedom of speech. On June 4th, 1989, the protesters were forcibly suppressed on June 4th when the government declared martial law and sent the military occupy central parts of Beijing. Troops armed with assault rifles and tanks opened fire on the demonstrators and those who attempted to block the military advancements. This became what was known as Tiananmen Square Massacre. The event has been widely censored throughout China. In fact, many words even remotely related to the incident have been censored on the internet in China. This event, however, acts as an inspiration to the protests in Hong Kong, as the protesters of Tiananmen Square were willing to risk their lives in order to better the country they live in. This event is a great example of nationalism.
Thank you for this great insight, Mary. Now, for a little more insight on the current events in Hong Kong, we have reporters Remy's Kitchen and Macaroni.
As the protests developed, the protesters began laying down 5 demands, under the slogan, 5 demands, no less. These demands included the withdrawal of the bill, investigation into alleged police brutality and misconduct, the release of arrested protesters, a complete retraction of the official characterization of these protests as riots, and Chief Executive Carrie Lam's resignation.
That's right, Remy. As of now, the most recent protests were on the 1st of January and on the 25th. On January 1st in 2020, the protesters formed a human chain that went for miles. People wore masks as face wear that covers one's face is illegal in China, and held up signs that said freedom is not free. While the protest was mostly peaceful, some violence would occur, and the police threw tear gas into the crowds. With more recent news in Hong Kong, there are more than 3,000 doctors, nurses, and other hospital workers in Hong Kong voted in favor of striking unless the city closes its border with mainland China. The South China Morning Post reported due to the recent outbreaks of the coronavirus. Yikes.
Thank you for the information. So, it seems like we have some very violent protests resulting from citizens who are not afraid to stand up to the higher powers, even if it means death, as long as it is for the better of their country. Quite nationalistic indeed. I have never heard of anything like this to such a large scale. Now, I believe us and our viewers now know everything we need regarding China. With that, I'm going to go take a shower pill. We will see you next time in the Wakaliwood studios.
Streets, and after leader Carrie Lamb.
What? What happened?
His voice.
Wow.
Started it. 3.
Can you move, Mikey?
Jacob. Jacob.
No,
please.
Mikey's literally standing.
Jacob, please. I do not want to send you to
let's go.
African therapy.
Let's go.
But I will send you to African therapy. And the wooden spoons hurt pretty
Maybe.
bad.